Good morning and welcome to the first BIM Harambee conference and our conversation about building information modeling and FM. Building information modeling is increasingly being adopted during the construction phases of projects as well as during the design phases, but we find that it still is in infancy stages in life cycle management and facilities management. With me today, I have an esteemed panel to have a conversation about how we can promote this and the benefits of BIM in facilities management. I'm going to allow the panel to introduce themselves quickly, and we'll start with Leon.
Hi, Jay. Thank you very much. And BIM Harambee, welcome to the Africa. And going for BIM in facilities management, Leon from Rensburg. I talk crap most of the time, but for the purposes of this, we're looking at how do we integrate these systems. We do a fair amount of this with our clients from a consulting perspective and understand the software environment a bit as well.
Fantastic. Andrew.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Harambee. My name is Andrew Mason. I've been in the building game, well, the built environment for probably over 30 years. I'm going to give away my age. Started looking at buildings at the end of their useful life cycle, then started project managing new builds, and now I'm in what's, I suppose, the messy middle, which is facilities management. I'm a facilities management consultant and immediate past president of the South African Facilities Management Association. I'm glad to be here with you today, Jay. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrew. Sean.
Hi, Jay. Thanks very much. Welcome everybody to this fantastic initiative. It's quite exciting. And I'm very happy to be here. I'm Sean Godoy. I'm a Director of Diversity Property Solutions and co-founder of SA PropTech and PropTech Africa Associations. So I've been in the real estate industry for about a decade, working for large property consultancies and also for property developers. So I come from the owner developer side of the game, and obviously post-construction management of assets, and very interested in technology and innovation in general. So yes, thanks a lot.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sean. And Thabelo.
Thanks, Jay. As a guys, welcome to Harambee, right? And my name is Thabelo Nechibungurudu, right? I've been in the game for almost 11 years now, right? Working basically in the AEC space, architecture, engineering, and construction. And I've had the privilege of working with clients from design phase all the way through to facility management, right? And basically steering the BIM implementation with most of these clients, right? And I'm excited about this conversation and glad to see what's going to come up from here.
Fantastic. Thank you, Thabelo. So, guys, I have as a first question the obvious question, which is what is the benefits of BIM for facilities management? Andrew, can I pitch that question to you?
Yeah, of course, Jay. I'm glad you got me to a facilities manager first. So yeah, I mean, very briefly, I know we're going to touch on this subject, but I just want to emphasize, the operating life cycle of a building, i.e. that bit after the design team walk away from the building, represents a huge majority of the cost of that building over its life cycle. Anything between 70 and 80% of that. And so for us, the prime issue for us is data, is information. We don't get an awful lot of information often, even at the beginning of a brand new building life cycle, let alone the existing built environment. And let's remember that the new build environment probably only represents less than 2% of the total building stock out there. So it's really about information. And every time that building over its life cycle changes operation, some of that information gets lost, if even that information that was handed over at the handover stage. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is, when I was at varsity, I did a degree in building surveying. My lecturer said to me, remember one thing, you will make your living off architects' mistakes. And that's so true. And it's not meant to be disparaging to architects, but bad design, BIM is going to hopefully design a better product. the idea of facilities management in South Africa currently is pretty much not advanced much more than reactive maintenance. Something breaks, you go fix it, rather than looking at sort of proactive types of maintenance, whether that's scheduled maintenance, whether that's condition-based maintenance. And obviously we could go on to BIM as the sort of foundation for digital twins. So those are the main issues. I mean, I think there's other issues around lack of convenience in terms of the way you operate the building, unforeseen usage, and how you monitor that building as it operates. So I think those are the main areas for me.
Fantastic, thank you. Sean, anything on your side?
Yes, yeah, definitely. I agree with Andrew's comments. I think, obviously, like I said, from my end, I've been mostly involved in the sort of the pre-development market analysis stage, and then the management, the asset management, investment management of assets, and then some exposure to property facilities management. But there's a real, for starters, there's a real benefit to have a digital model that is carried through the entire life cycle. I think this is something, in terms of PropTech, the value chain of transactions and management, etc., which is at obviously the latter stage, that PropTech can sort of enhance their different stages and also connect them to make things more efficient. And what's interesting is if you sort of expand this to the design stage, I think it's extremely valuable, because it can improve, like Andrew said, you can design better, you could build better, and then you can manage better. And there's a whole host of things I think we're still discovering on the management side, the property management side, the asset management in terms of refabs, in terms of assessing your assets. I think it's really exciting. And also BIM provides a really exciting foundation for PropTechs or property technology companies to come in to various stages. But obviously on my side, at the latter end, it's super exciting, because you could do all sorts of things, from smart buildings to clever asset registries, etc. So yeah, for me, it's massive potential, and I think we're scratching the surface, which is one reason I'm very excited about BIM.
So the question I have is, are there any disadvantages then to BIM? And I'll leave that open to anybody who wants to answer that. Leon.
I'll take a stab at that one. I think the answer is yes, there is. And in my opinion, why I say that is because of a disjunct in terminology and understanding. When we go from a professional team environment, your architects, engineers, construction, they have certain terminologies for that whole process, but that disjunct then happens when it passes over to the owner-operators. Now, I've been more in the owner-operator perspective than in a construction phase, but although BIM is building up all this information and presenting it in a nice way so that people can understand it, I think the disadvantage of it is the amount of information that they're then trying to pass along. And it's the way that it's structured sometimes, and also the no level or no base of criteria or terminologies that's being set. I refer it generally back to Thabelo that's being spoken on mines. And if they created that language so that the people working there can understand what they need to do, how they need to do it, and when they need to do that. And I think on the projects that I've been involved with, I find that that is the big part of disjunct. When we talk about BIM, we talk about this fancy world, and we're not bringing it back to tangible aspects that the facility managers, the owner operators can actually take back into their business. And as Andrew said, for the longevity of it, make it successful. And I think that is a big disadvantage that we really need to work on.
Andrew, anything to add to that?
Jay, I actually don't have anything. I'm not sure. And I'll tell you for why I'm not sure. And I suppose this is either my ignorance, I've either reached the level of my own incompetence. But as a facilities manager, we don't see BIM models. I mean, I can think of, I'm not going to name the building, but it's the biggest office complex in South Africa. I think it's the biggest office complex in the Southern Hemisphere, actually, was designed without BIM. It was designed and built without the use of BIM. And so there is nothing there for the operator to be able to latch onto. So, you know, we sit in a situation where construction is like no other production environment. You know, it's fraught with a lack of cooperation amongst the teams at the beginning. It takes many years to produce a single unit of production, which is unique. The costs are many more times to operate it than to construct it. And it's done in the main without any reference or consultation to those people who are going to be responsible for operating it. At the end of that, it foists on the operator, who's the new boy on the block, or girl on the block, what is essentially an unseen and an unproven prototype. And then often the design team proceed to walk away from that before the proof of design is complete, when there's generally too late to make any changes, or there are costly errors that could have been foreseen at the outset of the process. So, I mean, the whole design end-to-end process, I'm just talking about the beginning of the end, if you see what I mean, not the end of the beginning. Well, no, it's the end of the beginning, not the beginning of the end. Sorry, I'm getting my terminology checked. It seems ironic to me that we're left holding the baby with very little information about how it was constructed and what it was constructed for.
That's quite interesting. Anything from your side, Tabs?
Yeah, it is quite interesting what Andrew and Leon are saying, right? But I think the disadvantage of BIM in South Africa basically comes from when BIM started in our region, because most of the time, as an architect as well, when we heard of BIM, everyone referred back to just a 3D model, right? And BIM essentially is the data that goes on that 3D model. And I feel because of that mindset, where professionals are creating this fancy 3D models, they're not inputting the data that should go through to facility management. And that's where I feel like there's a break in the whole BIM implementation and the whole process of implementing BIM in construction. If you look at the plant space or the mining space, when the guys design a plant, right, with those steel structures and everything, and piping, all that information is in that, the data itself is there before the model is created. And the draftsperson or the designer takes the data and creates a 3D model from it. And that gets taken through to fabrication and construction, and then it becomes easier to then maintain that structure or that property. But in the construction space, like what Andrew clearly said, as a facility manager, there's so little info to work with because that data doesn't go all the way through to handover. And I think that's the biggest problem when it comes to BIM, because professionals focus more on the 3D model and not the actual information that goes in the BIM model itself.
So if I understand you correctly, it's almost like the eye is missing in BIM, or the exactly. Eye is a small eye when it's supposed to be a large eye.
Large eye, exactly.
So what are our barriers into implementing this, Leon?
I'll jump in there. The interesting points that are raised there. So, you know, barriers or disadvantages. I think one of them is who takes responsibility for, you know, deciding to implement BIM into a project. So obviously, like Thabelo said, it's yeah, you can't really do it later on. I mean, you could if there's data, etc., but it's quite a big project. And in the environment, you know, currently is obviously significantly under pressure. Landlords, everybody, construction companies, but in a normal, if you move the economics to like a normal level, contractors, architects, everyone's very pressed, you know, when they deliver projects. So the responsibility comes from someone who understands the benefits and is going to take that on. Probably means additional resources and skills that, you know, may be difficult to obtain. And then it's obviously the cost. So It's hard, it's hard to say. Maybe it could be shared. Perhaps an architect or a contractor decides to implement BIM in their projects, but they will likely have to take on, upskill and take the cost on. Or perhaps, the developer kind of initiates and funds the project. So perhaps it's on their side, but I think there's, like was mentioned, there's a lack of sort of still understanding and awareness of the value that BIM offers. So that's why obviously BIM Africa and the Harambee specifically is fantastic, because hopefully, developers and investors, etc., will be listening and learning as well. So I think that's a big thing, is who's going to lead this. And like this, we've said a few times, like we need to connect people and get the various people in the different silos talking to each other. But I think it's convincing people to invest in it.
And Sean, I think you make a good point there. That sort of leads to the next question, and I'm actually going to direct this one at Andrew. Do we find that there's a disconnect between in a property development company or owner-operator, between the development project team and the operations project team? Do those talk to each other the way they should be?
I think that's the absolute crux of the point. I just want to go back on something that Sean said. From a development perspective, if there is a use case, a proper use case for BIM in the operating phase, then surely the value of that comes through in the resale from a developer's point of view. The value of that building must increase. I mean, a similar example we saw 10 years ago with the Green Building Council. People wanting to build green buildings, they were supposedly more expensive, but you've seen I'm sure Sean can give us the data. The green buildings hold their value much better than any other. BIM must be along the same lines. But to go back to your question, I mean, even on let's call it a traditional type design project, the operator or the owner operator or developer doesn't think about, in my view, the longevity of that building, and they don't get facilities managers, generally speaking, involved. And I have laid this blame, I'm on record as laying this blame fairly and squarely at the feet of the architect. The architect owes a duty of care to their client, not just up to when they hand the keys over. It has a longevity, that building, and they have to have and get the people involved who operate that building, because it's not, generally speaking, the client. Even if he is an owner-occupier, he's going to appoint a facilities manager to do it. I don't know why that happens. I suspect it's because there are potentially very difficult questions that a designer has to answer about how that building is going to operate. And I suspect they don't want to be have to answer those questions. I really don't know. So I think that's the biggest issue for me, is get the operator involved early on, whether that's a BIM project or not. That's the first thing. I liken modern buildings to a Formula One car. It's a massive piece of technology, but a Formula One car is designed to do one thing, driven by one person over a period of 2 hours on any given Sunday, 20 times a season, and then it's retired. It allows for complete overhauls and several refits back in the garage with no running repairs to the major components whilst operating. A building, however, is far more complex. It's designed to enable thousands of people to achieve hundreds of thousands of things every day for decades, with maybe 1 or 2 major refits, often while still occupied and operating. Formula One works so well because of that real-time feedback from the car and the driver. And I suppose there's the simile between digital twins. But without BIM, that's just not possible. And now we have this idea that, obviously with COVID, this idea of returning to a COVID-safe workplace is not going to be the new normal. It cannot be. You don't want an office building, for example, to look more like a hospital than it does hospitality. There's going to be a different way of working, which is going to involve much more people-friendly spaces. And for that, you need data back and feedback into, and you cannot do that without a BIM model, in my view.
No, most definitely. So, do we have the skill set to drive the adoption and the use of BIM in the facilities management space? I think that's one of the questions we
No,
ask of green buildings as
honestly,
well.
I'll be honest and I'll say no, because we've not been exposed to it. I suspect you will find, if you ask 10 facilities managers in a room what BIM even stands for, you'd probably get 10 different answers. I honestly don't think so. And when you start talking about 3D, they'll think about 3D as in 3D. Then you start talking about 4D, 5D, 6D, 7D. They'll be absolutely gaga. They wouldn't know what you're talking about.
And so, how do we get FM involved earlier in this process? Is it a process where we look at what the Green Building Council's done in rolling out green building and the benefits of green building? Is that something similar that we have to do in terms of BIM, looking at the benefits that BIM actually has in driving that life cycle operational cost of that building? How would we go about that? Sean, do you have a viewpoint on that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the reference to green buildings is an interesting one, because it's almost like green buildings had this similar challenges, in the last probably 2 decades, because it also takes time for that evidence and data to materialize in terms of the value add. So, until transactions and operational data is available, it's hard to, get hard facts for landlords and developers. But yeah, I don't really know how you change that, because everyone identifies the same issue. Maybe you need to rethink the project team, and it comes back to wider, which is something I'm interested in, like wider innovation. It doesn't always have to be massively disruptive or tech driven. Maybe we just need to rethink the project team. And like Andrew's saying, the initial project team, you should have the FM identified and present, as well as the property manager, because their input's really important in the design stage. Maybe architectural practices should hire FMs. I mean, for me, that makes total sense. They could review and evaluate, they could be part of the design process and then give much needed sort of technical operational input. And then the other thing is BIM on the education side. Obviously, I think there's room for short courses, etc., and workshops. And then also at university level, within real estate, construction, architecture degrees, there should be BIM courses, which I think some universities are looking at implementing. UCT does have a PropTech course as part of their first year, I think. So that's on one side. Property studies is, people generally go on to be valuers and asset managers, etc. But I think within construction, architecture, QS also relevant. So I guess you've got to think of short-term and long-term solutions.
And Sean, I really like the point you made with the gathering of data on BIM. I think, Leon, you will agree that currently BIM is being driven by your architectural companies in terms of what they want to deliver, yet we still have the barriers of intellectual property, the sharing of data, et cetera, happening. And that compensation is not necessarily coming through from the property owner in wanting a BIM building. It sounds like the real challenge in implementing BIM is how do we get the property owner to drive the BIM project for facilities management to use it. Does that sound correct, Leon?
Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the questions, Jay, that we need to look at. After doing quite a bit of implementation and having spoken to numerous architects, project managers, engineers, even in construction, what you find is they never implemented BIM because of what it can do in the longevity of it. They did it because they themselves saw short-term gains on a project. They could build things faster. They could ensure the accuracy, so they didn't have to spend more time on it. And what the whole AEC market did was they looked at it and they said, cool, well, we see personal benefit. Now, again, it's a bit of a disjunct. Because they see personal benefit, they don't really care what that benefit is long-term or what that benefit is further down the road. I was fortunate to be part of a team where we assessed 2,500 African projects, asking ourselves, where did the projects fail? And almost all of them failed at the planning stages, because what we couldn't do from a professional team side is constantly ask ourselves, what benefit does the owner operator have? What information does the owner operator have? We create all of this information that is part of BIM and important to BIM, but we could not relate that back to the owner operator and how they would be utilizing that information moving forward. We then went back to the owner operators, asking them the question, what would benefit them during the construction phase, and how can they match it more directly to when they give instructions through? And it was quite interesting what came out. And one of the things, it's a topic that I've picked up lately, and I'm running with that a bit more, is how do you tie back the construction and the whole project that you're doing to the business outcomes of the owner operator, be it a facilities manager, be it the actual people owning it, because they have business outcomes. Those business outcomes form part of their business plan and their business cases, and that's the reason why they agree to actually move forward with the construction of the property, road, bridge, whatever the case may be. And that at no point gets any light of day during a construction project. When we do the design phases, we don't tie that back going, does this match those business outcomes of the owner operator? We simply just continue down the line and we develop it. We're going, no, they'll need this. Don't worry, they'll need this. And I was at the stage where I got handed over a hotel at that stage. And I sat there and I said, actually, I can't operate it the way we wanted to. I can't match this to the outcomes that we established that the bank loaned us 30 million Rand for in order to do. So how the hell do I pay back my loan then? Because I couldn't match it. And I think when we look at this, education is definitely a critical component to how we achieve that. But we need to ask ourselves some serious questions on the design phase. And I feel the owner operators need to stamp down their authority because it is their building. It is not the professional team's building. I agree with what Andrew's saying, that there are principal agents acting on behalf of the owner operators that take this and run with it, never worrying about what is the client's actual intent when this is completed. So I think that there's a fair amount of this junk there that we need to look at, and we need to ask ourselves the questions on, instead of how do we implement it, how do you take a vested interest? How involved are you on your project? How do you want to keep tabs on it? One of the things I got asked actually this morning from our directors is, Leon, are you keeping under the thumb some of the processes that are going on? And if they don't, they want to know why. And I think that this is something that if the owner operators start hammering down, this is what we need, this is the information. I don't care if you call it an HVAC system or if you call it an air conditioning system. I don't care. But what I need is the following information. And I think by just constantly asking ourselves that information, we'll be able to start chipping away some of the benefits. From an owner-operator perspective, it is, what benefit are you going to get from something that is built quicker, more reliable, more accurate, and in budget? What would that mean to you? Because those were the benefits, and I know because I sold it just like some other people, those are the benefits that the architects, engineers, and construction companies were looking at. So it's, what questions should we ask ourselves to make this actually happen in the longer term?
Interesting points there. Andrew, I like the comparison you made with the Formula One team, and buildings and manufacturing. And something I made a mental note of was, when one looks at Formula One and you look at horse racing and all these kind of things, is the driver and the jockey is like the key component where feedback comes from, and changes gets made, on the team. do you feel that facilities management have got the right profile or status, if for lack of a better term, in the overall scheme of things, of actually being the driver of the building? Because that's the way I see it. They're the guys who need to make this building operate, and we all know, the effect space has on productivity of people inside that space.
That's the key. That's the key,
yeah.
Jay. And you're in a short answer, no. But I think I blame our industry for that. I blame the fact that we haven't put our hand up. I very deliberately called my company Workplace Fundi 4 years ago, before this idea of workplace really came out. But I mean, it's the one word now. Obviously, with COVID, has I suppose boosted the idea of workplace. But fundamentally, facilities managers have traditionally always come from the engineering backgrounds to look at how the building performs. But it's not about the building. It's about the people in the building and the productivity. As you said, it is one aspect. Productivity is one aspect. We're now hearing about lots of things around well-being, wellness, work-life balance. As we're all sitting here working from home, I don't know where you guys are, but I don't work from home anymore. I live at work now. So it's that. And what I've been, I think, quite a vocal participant of in the FM space is saying, guys, we have only ourselves to blame. We're not stepping up to the plate, in my view. We're still focusing on how the aircon works, or why the fire alarm keeps tripping, and it's not about that. And as we go into this new world of work, whatever that might look like, and there's lots of people out there polishing crystal balls, but they're still very cloudy and people can't see, and won't. It's going to develop. What it fundamentally comes down to is, if you can think about what we learned at school, the three circles of a Venn diagram. You've got people, you've got the people that occupy the building, you've got the performance of what those people are coming together to perform, whether it's a commercial organization or a charitable organization, whatever it might be. Performance, people, and the place. And it's the intersection of those, that's the really important part. Once it's the key for a facilities manager is to be able to measure people performance, company performance, and property performance, and link those together to provide a value proposition to the owner-occupier that says, okay, if I do this with my workplace, it has this output in terms of my business. Because workplace it's not non-core, it's an enabler of core business, whatever that core business might be.
And I think it's key, and Sean, I think you also touched on this. I think one of the problems also is the amount of time it takes to get feedback on the changes gets made. If you again compare to Formula One, I make a change, I get feedback quite immediately. Where if we make a change in the building environment or in the operations of a building, it takes long for that feedback to come back. And is it captured? That feedback. So Sean, from a PropTech point of view, how does this apply? And how can we measure this better in taking stuff forward?
It's a good point. I think some PropTech interventions, some have been around longer than others, but they are allowing us to measure things in a different way. So data, like Leon said, is really important, and it's the lifeblood of things like BIM and other PropTech interventions or other technology-driven interventions. So they feed off data, they also create data and help us use and store data in different ways. So smart buildings is one. If a building was smart, enabled in a smart sense, which can mean lots of different things, but if it had a variety of measures, sensors, etc., management platforms in place that was collecting a lot of data, it'd be quite interesting if you chose to try and implement them in that building. As Thabelo mentioned, it can be challenging, but you could kind of have a before and an after situation, which would be interesting. So that's at the operation stage, and that also helps in motivating the case for BIM to landlords and developers. So yeah, I mean, also if we could look to overseas, to buildings that are operating with BIM, and also look at if design was more efficient and quicker and construction. So we could, maybe that makes more sense to start with. And then it'd be great if there was a case study, maybe in the building that Andrew mentioned, sort of an interesting building, or probably wouldn't be that, because I don't doubt they want to spend more money on that. But maybe a building that goes through a big refit or renovation, that could be quite interesting. And then you implement, PropTech could assist in measuring this and collecting the data, providing the data. So yeah, that would be really interesting. It'd be cool if somebody could spearhead that kind of case study.
Great. Tubbs, any viewpoint from your side?
Sure. This the gents have said quite a lot regarding this, but my big thing when it comes to just implementing, bringing FM into the BIM space, right? Like, it's a simple question, and I've started asking this question to some of our clients as well. Like, what are the FM requirements for this project, right? Like a simple thing like that. What kind of information do we need to hand over to the client or to the owner to run the building, right? And I've noticed once, specifically like in the engineering space, the mechanical guys, if you tell them not to just put a system together, but also consider the facility managers at a later stage when the professional is not there anymore. How will they know what unit was placed for this HVAC system, right? So from my experience, unfortunately, I dealt with I can't mention the client, right? But it was a project where this guys ran a whole lot of properties, right? And the real estate department was struggling, was losing a lot of money from maintenance, right? And we literally had to go back, remodel the BIM file or the Revit file with the correct information for the guys using Accubus and the real estate guys to actually make use of that data to run the facility, right? And interestingly enough, in that specific company, we were dealing with interior designers, right, and architects. We're now able to then take manufacturer information, put it in the BIM model, and we're able to run their project more efficiently, right? And it's unfortunate that that company had to do it at a later stage. And I believe that if FMs or FM requirements are given to an architect or designer at design stage, it would bring in the facility management profession closer to the project and make it easier to take the project over to operation as well. Right, that's what I could add to this.
Yes, Andrew.
So it's interesting, I think this whole thing stems, yes, the BIM take up at the front end is very important, but it's that handover, it's that sort of, that end of the project phase or the development phase to the beginning of the operating phase, that there needs to be a connector. And I think of the How Train as a really good example of this. When I was running a project department, I used this as a case study. At the point that project was handed over, it was an absolute abject failure because it was over time, over budget, and all of the things that happened. But if you look back on that now, I think all of us would agree that How Train has been a rip-roaring success. So when do you judge a project as being a success? So for me, it's about the performance of the asset. You can't judge the performance of the asset on the day that you hand that key over. You do your handovers and all of that sort of stuff, but it's only in the performance of that, is it going to become a success or otherwise. So I personally, look, the performance of that building, my fees as a service provider or even as an internal operator, I'm paid based on the performance of that building, okay? Why shouldn't the architect be? Why should the architect take all of his money and the engineers, QSs, the whole design team, take their money upon completion? Why isn't there this, I think Leon mentioned it, this phase 2-3 years into the buildings, and you're looking at that in terms of, in the UK, they're starting to look at soft landings, but I don't know what the fee arrangements are, but look at the performance of that building. If that building doesn't perform the way the architect said it should perform, okay, 4 years into or 5 years after completion, then he should not get a fee for it, or have an annuity fee deducted, or whatever it might be. And I'm not going to go into business model fees. In the same way, that if he was going to have to perform that way, then sure as eggs is eggs, he'd bring in a facilities manager on board straight away to protect his future income.
And I agree with you, Andrew. Leon.
Yeah, actually, I want to land on what Andrew said. You know, I think it's a great analogy that you used with the Gautrain, Andrew. I sometimes think that there are misinterpretations and misconceptions on how long things would take, how complicated things are, and what the costs associated are. And we want things to be done and squeezed into a certain manner. And Andrew, I think you raised a couple of interesting questions there, you know, around the life cycle and having a vested interest. What we find is people are so easy and so eager to put their names on buildings that they've built. That's nice. You know, if we look at the Sasol building in where's it, Rosebank, and you know, it's great to say, oh, look at my status. Look what we've been part of. Wouldn't it be far greater to say, you know what, we built this, and we considered the maintenance, we considered the running, and 5 years down the line, we've now come back and said, good grief, look, we've actually brought it in that we are now generating far above what the expectations were. And that's vested interest. As much as what I said earlier, that there should be vested interest from the facilities manager and the owner operators in the actual construction, it should be vested interest of the professional team to not just want to walk away once the project is done and go, cool, right, where's my next one? That they should be vested in saying, you know, I put my personal name, my professional name on this to ensure that it would go the way that it needs to go. And Andrew, I think you've got a very valid point there, to work on a model where all stakeholders on a project have got a vested interest for a set period, and whatever that period is, you know, and now take that information and say, cool, well, how do we construct the next one better? How do we manage the next one better? Because that handover, that is the key to failure, in my opinion. We asked what are some of the disadvantages of BIM. You started off your second question. I believe that is one of them. You know, 80% of time after a project is spent evaluating information, finding information, and ensuring that it is the correct information. And that's 4 out of 5 days in a week. Good grief, you know, what do we do with the rest? So those are certainly questions that we should be looking at. And maybe that is a call to action and a challenge that we set out. You know, when we take on the next project, who's prepared to put up their hand and go, cool, how do we work out a package for a 5-year period after construction? What does that look like? And then we will ensure that the information being passed along and the information we add into a model or a facilities management software or whatever the case may be, even the instruction from the facilities owner, we'll make sure that those things are then becoming more accurate and more clear. And we all speak a similar language when it gets to these projects.
I agree. And I think one of the key points that's come up is that our contractual environment is also not ready for BIM. You know, the way contracts are being written, the way the contracts are being negotiated is probably lagging back a couple of years in going forward. So with that being said, and as we near the end of our conversation, I want to just go around and just ask for any last thoughts on the matter as to, you know, we know there are definite benefits to BIM. We know that most of the benefits actually lie in operating that building for the next 30 years, while the most immediate benefits are probably in construction and design. The bulk of the financial benefits is in operating that building. With that being said, you know, starting with Sean, any last thoughts on BIM and facilities management and how we could take this forward?
Yes, I think you made the point there. The benefits are clear if you have a decent understanding and, you know, spoken to the right people and read the right information. But I think, you know, coming back to points I said, I think it's the skills, the awareness, training side of it, and then practically perhaps rethinking, you know, who's involved at design construction stage. could be interesting. And then also, like I mentioned, sort of a case study, but which would be great as a sort of success a study that could be done to demonstrate to everyone involved, but also, you know, bring in the operators, etc., to the design stage, and then also vice versa. Perhaps, you know, construction architects, bring them in once a building's operating. So just maybe rethink who's involved and exposed. So then there's a deeper understanding of, you know, everybody's core focuses within the process.
Great, thanks, Sean. Andrew?
Yeah, I think I'm fairly outspoken about, I've said most of what I want to say, but I do think that this idea of connecting the development phase and the operating is the key. And how you do that, you incentivize the team to make sure that building performs. There are responsibilities on the owners, there's responsibilities on the facilities management. I think that's what they're trying to do with this idea of soft landings. But you know, at the moment, the contractual model, or even just if you look at the way that buildings have been built, fundamentally hasn't changed in probably 100 years. In terms of the contractual structure of understanding architect, engineer, handover, operate. So I think it does require a look, and maybe BIM is the accelerant for that. And I think if you can get that, looking at, you know, accurate, more up-to-date information, efficient data sharing amongst the development team. I mean, I know there's a challenge there, let alone getting the FM involved. Then you can drive efficiency, and with efficiency come cost savings, and that will be the case study. And I agree with Sean. I think we need a case study, and it may well be a leap of faith from a developer, from an owner occupier that intrinsically understands what we think are the benefits. They put their money where their mouth is, and I think we will find that, but it may take time, as it did in the Green Building Council example, where now that has become the industry norm. You know? So yeah, I that's why I'm here. I don't understand. I'm not a technophobe. I am a technophobe. I'm not a technical fundy. I don't understand necessarily BIM, but I do understand, and I can see the benefits of it, certainly for facilities management, but ultimately the whole profession.
Thanks, Andrew. Thabelo?
Yeah, what I could add on, right, just as an implementer of BIM, right, I think for a while, for a very long period, we've been focused on design and construction, right, and I think it's time we focus more on owner and operating the assets, right. There is a huge gap, as you can see from this conversation, or hear from this conversation, where us as the implementers of the processes and the technology don't really think of the handover, right? We talk about it, right? But most of our efforts has always been design, construction. And I think just the same way we came in and introduced BIM, the same type of energy, if it's focused more on the owners and the FM guys, right? We would achieve that bridge, right, between construction and handing over to the operators. Yeah, the contract work is there, right? The documentation is there. We know the process, right? And I think as tech guys, tech bundies, we have a key role to play in getting those two factors more together, putting them all together, basically. Yeah. Thanks,
Thabelo. And Leon?
Yeah, Jay, I think you made a very good comment before, you know, where you said the misinterpretation of BIM is very evident by the people on the panel. You know, the fact that there isn't a person from every single aspect on a project on the panel is, I think, it speaks volumes to what the interpretation is of the marriage, as Thabelo mentioned, you know, between these two factions. But I think moving forward, we should get out of this mentality of, well, who's going to pay for it? The question is, what the hell are you saving and gaining from not doing it? You know, we ask ourselves always the negative question. We don't want to look at the positives, the spin-offs. As a nation, we are very good at calculating when we've lost big money or we spent big money. What we're very poor at doing is keeping tabs on the run of the mill that adds up at the end of the day. You know, the 100 Rand here, the 1,000 there. We worry about the millions. Always worry about the millions. BIM is not worrying about the millions. On both sides, both the professional side as well as the owner-operators. It's not about the millions. It is about being considerate on every single aspect of that building and how do we take it forward. And I think if we really want to make a success out of this, I agree, let's have a decent case study. There are numerous case studies in Africa of consulting engineers and architects that have done BIM projects successfully. Why don't we just go back and ask the owner operator, say, we've done this, what have your expectations been? And has it been matched? You know, there are case studies that's 5 years old, so that you've got 5 years of data that you can track back and we can ask those questions. And I think that would be a very good start for us. You know, we don't have to start with a new build. We can start with what's happened already and ask ourselves, cool, is it working? Yes or no? And lastly, you know, I've mentioned before, is we've got to start taking ownership. Get involved, understand what the hell's going on, and let's not worry about the big languages on projects. People do that to confuse other people. I'm a firm believer of that. And just ask ourselves constantly, is this really in line with where we want to go? And I think, you know, in starting to ask more questions on projects, we're going to start getting better results coming from that. And I'm excited for the FM and the prop tech and the owner operators, because the question they should be asking themselves is not how much is this going to cost me. It's really about what are the benefits I'm going to see long term.
Fantastic. Thank you, Leon. Guys, that's it. Leon, Andrew, Sean, Thabelo, thank you for joining us today at this inaugural BIM Harambee conference. Really some good food for thought, and I think there's some practical steps we can take, you know, even if it's just in educating facilities management and owners a bit better around the BIM process and things like that. So thank you very much. Enjoy the long weekend coming up, and we'll touch base soon.
Jay, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Jay.
Thanks, Jay.
Thanks
Thanks everybody.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.